Hey guys, welcome to the video. So as you saw in my previous video in which I read an old fanfiction that I wrote, I used to be a terrible writer. Now I think of myself as a slightly less terrible writer. But hey, you never know for sure unless you get your work critiqued. So today I'm critiquing myself. I know that doesn't really count, but we're going to do it anyway. So if you follow me on Wattpad, which I'm sure you don't because that place is scary, you would know that I wrote and published two stories called the Unnatural series. These books follow two kids getting caught up in a war with alternate universe versions of humanity. Seems like a pretty normal plot, right? Well, what if I told you guys there was another version of Unnatural, one so weird and so stupid that nobody ever would have read it? Granted, I wrote it from like 4th grade till probably about 7th grade. I'm 16 now, and looking back, this series would have never worked the way I originally planned it. So thank God I reworked it into what it is today. This video is taking a look back at what might have been, what the world might have looked like if Unnatural's beta form had been its final form. Let's get started, shall we? Book 1 in the series would have been titled Dalen vs. the Anti-Humans. So, a little backstory on this book, and I guess Unnatural as a whole. I started this book in November of 2017, when I was in 4th grade. I was a month into my 10th year on this planet. I got decent grades. I was writing a play that was all honestly kind of a ripoff of Power Rangers. But that all changed when a new kid came to my class. This kid was Dalen. Now, when Dalen first moved to town, we didn't become friends right away. He tended to hang out with them in the more popular crowd of the class, and while I tended to be a loner. My best friend at the time was in a different class, and we were starting to grow apart. Probably for the better. That guy is kind of an asshole now. However, as soon as Dalen moved to town, I began to formulate a story in which a character with his name fought an alternate universe version of me from another universe. So I started writing the story on Microsoft Word on my family's computer. Eventually, I discovered that Dalen, the real person, not the character that I created, lived on my street. Like, seriously, what a coincidence. So the day after I found out, I decided to befriend him. It took a couple of tries, all with awkward conversations, but we became friends anyway. And, although we don't go to school together anymore, we've been friends ever since. And before you go commenting, I told him about the book at some point and he was okay with me using his name. So were all the other people I used names of in the books coming up. Now back to the actual story. If you read Unnatural the Reverse on Wattpad, you would know that things were much different than what I've described. For one, the bad humans in the final version are called the Reverse, while in the original version they were called the Anti-Humans. To be completely honest, my at the time undiagnosed autism was making me hyperfixate on the Fairly Odd Parents at the time. Weird choice for a 10-year-old in 2017. I know, but I've had worse. And that's where I got the name Anti-Humans from. Fop's Anti-Fairies. In fact, it was a direct ripoff of that. All the Anti-Humans had anti in front of their names, just like the Anti-Fairies. What was I thinking with all these ripoffs back then? Anyway, perhaps the biggest change was the antagonist. In the final version, the main antagonist of the first book was Reverse Dalen, a version of Dalen from an alternate universe in which he was evil and took over the world when it was in crisis from lack of natural resources. But in the original version, the villain was Anti-Zack, an alternate version of me. Well, not me, the character based on me, but you know what I mean. And Anti-Zack, as we'll get into later, was a brutal villain. He tortured Dalen later in the book, and in further books did worse things. But the story of the first Unnatural book would have been just the first out of a planned 6 books in the series. 6 books, and the next time Dalen and Zack would have shown up in a major capacity would have been the 6th book. Let me explain. The series would have been more in line with the likes of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Extended Universe at the time, in which each book would have followed a different character with a different storyline, and would have all crossed over in the final book. Let's move into the 2nd book. So because I didn't have a ton of details worked out for books 2 to 5, I'm just going to go through all of them quickly. Book 2, titled The Adventures of the Spy Children, would have followed a family of spies dealing with problems in Thailand, fighting off an evil corporation, and being betrayed by one of their own. I don't remember any of the other plot details and can't be bothered to search my family's OneDrive for them because why the hell would I? Book 3, titled Historical Heroes, would have been a time travel story about a kid and his brothers traveling through time after he buys a watch that can bring him to other time periods. Book 4, titled Pop Star Persona, would have been about a kid having to become his sister's manager after she becomes a famous pop star after buying a special microphone. And Book 5, which was untitled, was a ripoff of the movie Captain Marvel. Kind of. Except instead of aliens, it was cupids, and instead of an Infinity Stone, it was a plot device that I called a Universe Crystal, which was basically an Infinity Stone. Almost all of these plot points were eliminated from the final version of Unnatural in favor of Dalen's story, arguably the best and most thought out, being finished. The only plot lines that remained were some of the ones in Book 5, and even that happened mostly off-page and are only alluded to. The final book, titled The Kidnappings, actually had very little to do with the kidnappings that took place in the book. So, basically after years after believing I had deleted all of the book to write a new one with a similar concept, I actually found a copy on my family's OneDrive, and oh boy. Although this book was the second most thought out book in the series, it was still not good. The book would have followed the not fleshed out characters of the younger siblings of the main characters getting kidnapped, and the protagonists of the other books teaming up to save them. The perpetrator turns out to be Anti-Zack, who survived the events of the first book via performing the old switcheroo with a clone and having them kill the clone instead of him. So then Anti-Zack becomes a knockoff Thanos and collects the universe crystals, but instead of using them to wipe out the universe, he uses them to perform the old switcheroo with Earth and his home Anti-Earth. So before I go on, let me explain the way the universe crystals worked. Basically, they were the same as the Infinity Stones, but there were 5 instead of 6, and they each controlled a different thing. The Dark Crystal, which Anti-Zack already had, controlled evil. The Life Crystal around the neck of one of the spy children controlled life. The Time Crystal, located inside the watch of one of the main kids of Historical Heroes, controlled time. The Voice Crystal, inside the sister from Popstar Persona's microphone, arguably the most useless one, because all it does is manipulate somebody's voice. And finally, the Love Crystal, located inside the Cupid base, controlled love. So Anti-Zack would have pulled a Thanos and collected them all, puts Earth on the brink of destruction, and resurrects Anti-Earth. Also, he would have killed a kid at one point, and the time travel kid would have reversed it, and that's how Anti-Zack would have gotten the Time Crystal. If I remember correctly, the book would have ended with the effects being reversed, and Dalen sacrificing himself to kill Anti-Zack. Kind of dark for a 10 to 12-year-old to be writing. So as you guys can see, I put a lot of thought, effort, and time into these books. But I never finished them. I never finished any of these books. In fact, I barely started writing books 3 to 5 before quitting the series for a few years to focus on other projects. Eventually, I revisited the series and was like, what if I made this? But better. And the Unnatural series we know today was born. Now the question is, will I finish the final version of the Unnatural series? The answer? I don't actually know. So I currently have 2 volumes of a planned trilogy out on Wattpad. I have plans of making a third, because I gotta finish what I started, but I have no idea when or if it will come to fruition, because I haven't gotten a good story yet. I don't know where to go from where I left off, but what I do know is that I plan to take some inspiration from my younger self and start planning ahead for future series. If you like this video and want more like it, be sure to hit the like button. I've still got a ton of old stuff I could dig up, so if you want that, be sure to subscribe with notifications on. That's all for today. Bye, guys.